Good afternoon. This is Lorianne Cerullo from the WMGA. I'm very happy to announce that we have our series, Swing Series number 6 with Brian Harrington. Brian came to us in, I believe it was late May, Brian, and he gave us a lot of information in regards to exercises that we could do for mobility and for stability. And so this is a follow-on which kind of is going to focus more towards the attributes that we need in regards to our golf swing, part of that TPI process that we've all heard about. So Brian, I'm gonna let you go, or just have you take off and do what you do so well. As everyone knows, Brian is the president of Harrington Sports Performance, and he works with not only high school and collegiate athletes, but also has TPI certification and many other certifications. So we do appreciate his time. This is also going to be recorded, and we will put it up on our YouTube so you can watch it later. So Brian, everybody right now is seeing you and they're muted, and they could do Q&A. We'll see if we could do opening it as we go forward. But I appreciate you coming on board and giving us some more information on how I could get some more yardage out of my golf swing. So I'll let you, Brian, take it away from here.
Sure. Well, thank you, ladies, for having me back on. I appreciate the time here to jump back on and give you kind of a second round of, how we can progress now from what we know to furthering into now, creating more, like you said, yardage on your golf swing. So just to recap, what we did last time, for those who maybe everyone was on, maybe people weren't on for the last one, but we pretty much talked about a little bit of, kind of assessing your body. We talked about a joint by joint approach. And what we meant by that was, looking at your body from your ankles up, from your feet up, and understanding what joints need stability and what joints need mobility. And it's pretty much in every other joint type of situation. So your ankle is a mobile joint, your knee is a stable joint, hip is a mobile joint, lumbar spine is a stable joint. And those kind of things are very, very important in the TPI world. So that's the Titleist Performance Institute, okay? And we use that approach to understand your body swing, what we call the body swing, and how your body is supposed to kind of move through your swing. Now, everyone's swing is different, so we don't want to ever make you try to replicate one type of swing. Everyone's body is different, but what we do want to make sure of is that the basics of a swing take place in each and every swing. So what do we mean by that? We want to know that your hips are rotating on your backswing, followed by your torso and your shoulders, followed by your hands, which is followed by your club head, and then in reverse on the way down. And on the way down, that swing, that velocity from each point should actually be doubled in the amount of velocity that we're creating. So those things are very, very important to understand, and we're going to have to do assessments on those things and how to strengthen those type of points of your body to make sure that we have a nice even swing. So as I go through this all, again, if you do have questions, we do have a smaller group tonight, so it can be a little bit more intimate. And if you feel like you want to ask questions, stop me, speak about, ask me any questions in regarding to your swing or assessment, please feel free to do so. So again, so I'm going to back this camera up a little bit, and then we're going to kind of chat about that. So with TPI, when you go through a TPI certification, it lasts 8 hours. So I'm not going to give you 8 hours. I have to give you, a good 45, 50 minutes, and then we can have some Q&A. But pretty much what I was saying is, what I talked about last time, let me just back myself up even more. I'm sorry. Give you a full, so I'm not decapitated over there. So we spoke about the joint by joint approach, your ankles, your knees, your hips, your lumbar spine, your thoracic spine, and then your shoulders, and all being mobile and stable. We also talked about a stack position, understanding how to stand with your ankles over your feet, your knees over your ankles, your hips over your knees, and so on and so forth. And that's very important for posture. And when we talk about TPI, we talk about posture often and a lot. That's what we talk about, your golf posture. So are we able to get into certain angles where we're able to hinge? As any golfer knows, we need to be able to hinge at the hip and then be able to have internal and external rotation of your hips. So as you swing, as those hips move, your leg needs to be able to internally rotate and externally rotate on the other leg. So as I'm coming back, if I'm a righty golfer and I'm having my backswing, my left leg is actually internally rotating, and my right leg is externally rotating, and then vice versa on the way down. If I don't have that kind of mobility in my hips, that's going to create some sort of deficiency, which is going to create an alternate golf swing. You're going to look for that mobility somewhere else. Okay, so with our swing assessment, what we try to do is we try to see if your hips can have mobility. Can they turn side to side? So if we can kind of put our hands across our chest, are we able to, without moving our torso, just turn our hips? And we're looking for, if you're hiking them, if you're kind of moving them side to side. So we're staying, what's nice is I kind of have a bar behind me, so you can kind of see that line of I'm just staying on that line. And then in the same sense, can we do that with our thoracic spine? Because our lumbar spine, jumping back to my first conversation, is supposed to be stable. So that's not supposed to move. My hips need to move, and then my thoracic spine, the middle of my back, needs to be able to move so that my shoulders can get back on the backswing, okay, and then back through. So in the same sense, can you hold yourself there and then just rotate your torso without having your hips move? Now, what we'll look at is if you do that and you start to move your hips, okay, that means you have a thoracic spine issue. Your thoracic spine is tight, and that means you're going to look for more mobility through your shoulders, and that's when sometimes you feel like you're doing a lot of chopping. Mm-hmm. Okay, so are we able to have differentiation here and here? Those are the 2 points of mobility we really need to work on, okay? And then again, at the same time, are we able to keep that lumbar spine stable, or are we sometimes, because we don't have mobility, what we start to do is start to create what we call a C-spine, right? And we're really trying to chop or push the ball. Mm-hmm. Those are issues we need to talk about. And if we have that C-spine, then we'll probably have a little bit of poor strength in our hamstrings and our glutes, and not the ability to, what I said before, kind of hip hinge.
Yeah. Brian, let me ask you, those two exercises, those two things that you did, are those drills that we should be doing as well, as opposed to just an assessment? I mean, is that something we should do?
So it's definitely an assessment, and that's how, as a TPI certified person, we'll look at immediately and say, okay, do they have that mobility? So that's like a quick assessment, and you could do it on your own as long as you have a mirror. You could look at yourself and say, okay, well, is my shoulder just moving, or are my hips going with it? Now, along with that, what's nice about it, it's kind of a warm-up drill. It's kind of like a mobility warm-up drill. So it's kind of, I wouldn't call it a strengthening exercise, but it's more of something that get our body warm. Now, if this takes place, okay, when you're trying to move your hips, right? You're trying to go back and forth with your hips, but this kind of starts taking place. Sometimes we don't really conceptualize what's going on. So a simple way to do it is just kind of have somebody hold your shoulders and then see if you have mobility in your hips. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, then we know we have mobility. We just kind of work on understanding different parts of our body and understand how they work together. So those two parts, your thoracic spine and your hip mobility, are very, very important to work on to make sure we have. If not, like I said, we're going to have a curved spine, and then we're going to start pushing the ball and chopping it with our shoulders and our arms. Okay. The second part I kind of want to talk about today. So that's really, again, there's a whole series of assessments we do in TPI, but those I feel like are what people struggle with, especially general population struggle with the most, is having that flow and being able to differentiate the lower half and disassociate the lower half from the upper half, and then creating that mobility. So along with that, I would say the next thing really would be our shoulder mobility, because those are the three joints we talked about, the joint by joint approach, that need to be mobile. Okay, the other ones are more stable. So it's tough for me to do it here, unfortunately, in my setting. But what you can do is you sit against the wall. So kind of picture myself sitting flat against the wall, and you put your arms in a 90 degree, and you just kind of see if you can get those arms to travel up the wall. And what a lot of times what we'll do is we're kind of out here. We don't have that mobility, right? Or or we ask you to kind of just come here and raise them up. How far back can you get them? You could do that in a seated position as well. So you can have, and a lot of times what we'll do is we'll take a golf club, and an easy way to do it is just take that golf club, have somebody sit, and then can they get that golf club kind of back overhead without arching and cheating, like arching the spine and pulling yourself forward. Because like I said, as human beings, we always will look for compensation, and our body will always find the easiest way to compensate. So, you have to have somebody visually assess you, because sometimes, when we do it on our own, we don't really understand if we are kind of pulling forward. So, if you have somebody just kind of see, is your body staying in the same line in space and not having any curvature in your spine. So those 3 points of mobility, which I wanted to stress tonight, are very, very important in your golf game. Again, I can go on and on about the different assessments, and if you want to contact me, we can do those kind of things. But so those are the 3 things we really need to work on. So we need to work on those things with mobility drills, and then also strengthening exercises. So again, we're going to start to layer those kind of things into this conversation today. So in terms of our hips, let's start back at our hips, because those are a point of emphasis, and that's a point of where we struggle with, especially if we kind of sit at a desk or have, we're still in quarantine. We're probably doing a lot of homework, working from home, sitting at a desk, doing some typing and stuff like that. So we need to loosen those things up. And it's actually interesting. I work with a lot of athletes, college athletes, stuff like that. And a few of my college athletes recently mentioned to me, like, my hips have been so weak because I haven't been doing anything. So that's such a point of emphasis. So if you have a miniband, it would be a really great tool to have. I know for a long time these things were going on Amazon. It was hard to find. I think these things are starting to come back and becoming more accessible. So a miniband is like a great warm-up tool, a great activation tool. I use it with almost everybody I work with. That's going to really create some strength in your hips and some activation. I want to say more activation than strength. And when I say activation, what I mean by that is we really want to turn those hip muscles on that are a little bit dormant. So we want to try to get those things working, because the more we turn them on, the more kind of we'll be able to find that mobility that we're looking for. So with the miniband, there's a billion different things you could do, but the ones that I kind of like to stress is our hydrants and our clamshells and glute bridges. So glute bridges, hydrants, and clamshells for activation, for a warm up. So what do I mean by that? You take a miniband, okay, and you're going to kind of put it around both legs, right underneath your knee. I like that position because it's most manageable for most everybody across the board. I'm going to adjust this screen just a tiny bit more. And what we'll do for our glute bridges, and I think we've talked about this even in our first talk as an activation exercise, the miniband now is going to help put manageable resistance on our hips, right? So we want to make sure we load our body properly, and that's one of the worst things we can do, especially if you haven't really done much activity or done much resistance work. The biggest mistake you can make is come kind of either once we get out of quarantine, if we do, or you start to find trainers to work with or working out from home, whatever it is to jump on your resistance training like too fast, too aggressively, too quickly. So minibands are a good way to manage that. They come in a pack, and you could kind of, feel out what's best resistance for you. I would suggest starting with a light to medium resistance band if you haven't done much, and then work your way up. So I put the miniband underneath my knees, okay? And again, what the miniband is doing is it's creating tension. It wants me to drive my knees together, but I have to keep it apart, and that's going to activate my hip. My hip here is doing the work to keep that turned on, okay? So I come down on the floor. I lay back in a glute bridge position. I like to have people point their toes up because, again, it really starts to target your posterior more. And I'm making sure my knees aren't sinking together the whole ride of this exercise. I'm driving my glutes together. My ribs are staying tight. Up, 1, 2, and then release, all the while making sure this does not take place. So it's nice, even resistance. And you'll be surprised. I mean, plenty of you, I'm sure, have done this. Some of you may have not. But if you haven't, you'll be surprised how much your hips start to really feel, that activation work, okay? So that's one exercise there. Then we're gonna go on our side, and we're in a fetal position. So your knees, your heels are underneath your butt, okay, as if you're laying in a fetal position. And they're not long. You're gonna try to have about a 45-degree angle at your knee, okay? So you're not too long, you're not too tough, but maybe about a 45. Your feet are glued together, and all you're trying to do is lift out one knee off the other without rotating your torso. You keep your torso square, and you're just working that hip. You do a series of 10 to 12 reps there, you'll really start to feel it. And then the hydrants are named after our canine friends for how they go in a hydrant, right? On all fours, knees under the hips, hands under the shoulders for stability. Okay, that can make a difference if you're out here trying to stabilize and you already have poor shoulder mobility, or you have neck issues or trap issues or something like that, and you're stabilizing all the way out here. It's going to put a lot of pressure back there. So we want to make sure we decrease the amount of pressure in the right, mechanical situation. And then all we're doing is we're driving that knee up to the side. So those three exercises are really going to start to activate that glute hip complex, okay, which is very important for being able to stabilize as well as mobilize, be mobile, rotate through your swing, okay? So in terms of that, I would suggest to start with things like that, and then we can move on to more advanced exercises. So more advanced exercises for our posterior. So like I mentioned earlier, I mentioned that, the ability to hinge will eliminate our C-spine, our hinging over, right? So when I do that kind of the C-spine approach, right, I have a curved spine, it's because I don't really have a lot of activation or strength to drive my hips back and hold it through my posterior here, okay? So strengthening your posterior is important because in golf, if you're good, you're shooting not as many shots. If you're not as good and you can go out there at 18 holes, seems like a long time, but how many shots? And being able to do this over 18 holes, or however many shots you're taking, you get fatigued. It's a long time. So we really need to have, even some great golfers, towards the end of that 18, they start to, get a little tired back here. So we really need to work on our posterior strength training, okay? So we could start bilaterally, meaning 2 feet on the ground, okay? Just in a simple hip hinge, RDL, which is Romanian deadlift, or just deadlift by feet, square, kind of like your golf swing. Okay, you might have a little bit of adjustment in your golf swing based on your swing, which is totally fine, but for the most part, your feet are underneath your hips, okay, their toes are pointed forward, and all we're trying to do is take this weight, sit back in the chair, let our chest come forward, don't look up, because if we look up, we start to actually curve our spine and put pressure on our lumbar spine. But kind of tuck our chin, put the weight down between our feet, boom, stand up. Okay, so the hip hinge is a lot different than a squat. Okay, so again, you kind of have the luxury of seeing this bar back of me. I'll use that as a line. So once I bend my knees, my hips are at that line. Now my hips are just going back on that line. Hopefully you can see that.
Yeah.
As opposed to dropping below that line. That's a squat, right? So once we get to the point of horizontal, vertical, we need to, now we're just going horizontal. We're pushing back, okay? Now, we do that well. Golf and other sports are actually unilateral, so they're not really bilateral. Yes, you're standing in a golf swing, but you're actually shifting weight from one side to the next, right? You're shifting back, and then you're shifting forward. So it's kind of, in a sense, a unilateral thing. One-legged strength is important. So once we get kind of better at those, and I would really suggest you make sure you're really stable at those before you move on, because once we lift one foot off the ground, all hell can break loose, right? So we want to make sure that we know how to do that bilateral deadlift, and then we'll start to work on our unilateral deadlift. So single, we call our single leg deadlift. Putting a weight in the hand, maybe we don't even have a weight in the hand to start. Feet are forward, and I'm going to try to take my hand and put it right back where my toe was, and then stand up. Okay, that's going to really help us with our stability and our strength training and our posterior for one leg at a time. Now, a mistake that we make here a lot, which again could be something that could be detrimental if you don't know you're doing it and you're doing it by yourself or you're not doing it without somebody watching you, is that we'll typically a lot of times, and I see a lot of people just do this, right? So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a straight line from my shoulder to my heel and let that hinge back as I come back. And if we don't have that lever, then we start to have, all we're doing is now creating like a C-spine, trying to reach down.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing we want to do is kind of reach back, come forward. That's going to create a very good stability and posterior strength training for golf because, again, we are transferring the weight from one side to the next. Okay. So is there any questions on that or anything I need to?
I have a question for you, Brian. So Brian, two things. One, can you go back and show the deadlift bend versus the squat bend that you did, just to get that in my head? And then the other thing is, how does the one difficulty I have sometimes is getting up to the ball. You got clubs of different length, and how do I make sure that I'm not too over or too under in regards to that stance? I'm trying to do the right hip flexion, or the hip flex in order to get over the ball. But if I'm too far forward, I'm very flat, and like you said, all hell breaks loose. So between those two, the two exercises you showed, it was very interesting. I'd like to see the difference, and then which one of those is more conducive to the way I should be bending forward for my stance in addressing the ball.
So everyone's stance, first of all, everyone's stance is different. So like I said at TPI, I can't give you an idea of whose stance is what because we want your stance to be your stance and your swing to be your swing. Okay, but everyone does have to have the ability to have a flat back, a flat posture, and push their hips behind them, right? So getting back to like my club here, I mean, what you're pretty much trying to do is come over the ball. So your arms are pretty much straight down. Right? We don't want to be reaching for the ball, right? So pretty much your arms are coming right down and your hips have to be back. Now that might be different with every club because of the height of the club, but at the same time, we're still not going this way. We want to go that way.
So it's more the deadlift bend than it is the squat bend.
So it's pretty much, that's what it is a deadlift bend.
Okay.
So we won't go so much into squats are great for like strengthening your body, but the hip hinge and the deadlift is a little bit more related to your swing.
Okay.
Right. So your squat is something. I'm sorry. I'll turn that off. My squat.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say who's beeping? Yeah.
My squat is more this way, but my hip hinge is more pushing my hips back. So again, my hips are dropping here. My hips are going back. Here again, that's where you're setting up. You're setting up here, not setting up down here.
Right.
You have to kind of lean over. Let me turn that off for us. But is there anything else that we want to touch base now before we move forward?
I don't have anything here, but ladies, if you want to ask a question, just select the chat and we will see it and make sure that we get that.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm trying to
do
the Dopey's text here. Okay, so anyway, so moving on there. So now let's talk about a little bit of our shoulder strengthening. So when it comes to our thoracic spine, I mean, that's mobile, right? And then we're going to talk about how to like create like rotation. We'll do some rotational exercises in a minute. But in terms of our shoulder strengthening and having some mobility there, so those are important exercises to work on. With our shoulder, a lot of the times we have a little bit poor range of motion. Sometimes we're pronated. Any of us are working at a computer or working at a desk all day. We're typically pronated, shoulders forward. So because our shoulders are forward, we want to be able to pull them back. Right? We want to create a better posture.
And so, Brian, just a quick thing. I did get a question from Christina. Does the deadlift also improve strength like the squat does?
They both do. They're both strengthening exercises, for sure. So they're both going to create strength through your lower body kinetic chain, so your legs. they're both core exercises. You both have to brace your core in order to do them. So, and what do I mean by that? Let me backtrack with that for a second. So when it comes to your core, how is this a core exercise, right? Every compound movement that we do, compound movement meaning like moving multiple joints at once that we work on, is always going to have, you always have to brace your core to do it. So if I do a deadlift and I'm doing this, rounding my back, that means my core and my posterior isn't strong enough to keep me in this position. So just because you're not like sitting, isolating your core, maybe in a plank or some sort of leg lower or something like that, doesn't mean you're not working your core. Your core has to constantly be turned on to continue to hold that posture throughout movement, right? And that's ultimately what we start to fatigue on throughout the day. We know, say we're at a desk and we're doing something, we start to fatigue, right? Or we're driving or whatever it may be. So getting back to that, we start to pronate, we start to round. So our shoulders start to turn in, we start to round, and we start to kind of collapse our core. So we need to work on everything posterior again to kind of pull ourselves back in that position. Okay. So something really easy to work on. I did think I mentioned this in the first talk that we did. It's just a row. So if you have a band, if you don't, we'll go over some other options possibly. Okay. But if you have a band and you hook it up to, you know, some sort of pole in your house, what we want to always do is make sure our hips are behind us. So we kind of we're working on that hinge. And then we're just driving our elbows back behind us to try to create this strengthening exercise, because when we start to pronate, the muscles in the back of our body become lengthened. They start to loosen up. And when you get out to the golf course and you don't have a strong back, I mean, if you look at Tiger Woods, he has a huge, strong back. He's one of the first golfers that have a really, really strong, big back. You see him walk down the course with his red t-shirt, I'm like, wow, his back is strong. And that allows him to really stay in that good posture constantly throughout the game, throughout the tournament. So we need to be able to have our back be strong enough to do that. If we're not, and we have that rounded shoulder kind of syndrome, you know, over time you're going to start hitting the ball, you know, and our swing's going to start to alter because we have that C-spine going on. So we're working on our pulls. So again, we kind of it kind of starts to link up together. Now we're working on our posterior, our glutes, our hamstrings. Now we start to move up to our back, working on those kind of things, right? So now we're pulling behind us. So again, if we had a band and we're kind of sitting, our hips behind us, that's a big part of it. Don't have, you know, sometimes we do a little hip tuck. Like people are kind of throwing their hips forward and doing this. Or they're doing a shoulder hike. So we start doing this, like pulling up with our shoulders, right? We're trying to take our shoulder blades, and what I say a lot of times is just put a pencil between your shoulder blades and try to squeeze that shoulder blade together. Squeeze that pencil, hold that together. Okay, so we're in here and we're just squeezing back and then releasing. And it's a slow tempo. Sometimes I see people, you know, do some of these crazy things where they're really trying to rip out reps. I mean, we're working on control. Okay, and if you could keep that tempo over time, that's actually going to help you more, because golf's a long game. Right? So if you don't have the band, okay, maybe you have a dumbbell where you can put your hand on something where you hinge, you don't round, you keep the back flat, and you just drive your elbow back behind you so your shoulder blade is tucked, it's not hiked, and we're coming down in here. Okay? So that's actually our horizontal pulls. We're pulling horizontally here. Okay. We also want to work on our vertical pulls, pulling down, because a lot of times we have people that are kind of hiked up. Our shoulders are hiked, our traps are kind of hiked up. We need to break that posture, because that creates our C posture, or it's really limiting our shoulder mobility when we try to swing. We start pushing the ball and elevating our hip too early, extending our hip too early, and the ball starts taking off in different directions. Okay? So again, with a band, if you have it, you hook it up to something, if you can, and you know, you can kneel, you could sit, whatever, you can kind of sit on the floor, and now we're just trying to pull that thing kind of down. and keep our shoulder blades, try to take our shoulder blades, what I always say, you should pull them in your back pocket. Try to pull your shoulder blades down. So if I'm here doing it, maybe you can look out from this angle. I'm just trying to get my shoulder blades down into my back pocket. And I'm not pulling in here, so I'm not hiking my shoulders. I'm really trying to pull my shoulders back, squeeze it down. So those exercises there are going to create a strong posterior, which again, going back to my first talk, will help our posture, will help our stack position, which will help us approach the ball, which will help us swing through the ball better.
Yep.
Okay. Now there's always, so let's move on from there. Unless we have any comments about any pulling exercise.
I do have one question, also from Christina.
Right.
She says, when I fatigue on the course, my legs get very tired and it affects my whole body. Are there leg exercises that can improve stamina in the legs?
So what I would suggest first and foremost about that is really just like exercising more often. So I don't know how much you exercise. So what I'm saying is I wouldn't say like, okay, exercise for a duration of time. I'm not sure of your current like exercise routine, but if you have a proper exercise routine, 3 to 4 times a week or 2 to 4 times a week based on your schedule, I would really think that will help improve your just overall muscular stamina and muscular endurance, which will help you on the course. And if you're training the proper way, it should help. There's a lot of variables there, like how much do you exercise, how often, what do you do, how often you play, how many holes are you playing at one time, so it's tough to kind of answer that. But I do think if you match your exercise with the amount that you're playing, then it should kind of equal out for you.
Well, and then just to follow on to that, and this is my question on that, is given that there's a lot of emphasis I see on the lunge, how does the lunge work compared to the squats and the deadlifts in terms of the legs? What is that? That's a very prominent one.
That's a great question. I mean, that's a great kind of follow-up question. And I'm sorry, I actually didn't even touch upon that. What I'm focusing on and trying to focus on tonight is our posterior part of our body. But a lunge, or what I call a split squat, which I would probably prefer first, because I prefer that first to suggest to everyone in this chat, because I don't know everyone in this chat's physical abilities. So let's make sure we kind of preface everything with that. You might be very well ready for multi-directional lunging, but you might not be. So I don't want to say something tonight where you go off on this tangent and do some exercises that maybe not for you. But what I would start with, again, if ready, which becomes a way more challenging environment than a regular squat, is that split squat. So what do I mean by that? So if you're squatting, you have 2 feet on the ground and you're down and up, okay? For the most part, maybe that seems a little easy. There might be a lot of mechanical things going wrong there too. And then once I do a split squat. So split squat meaning we stay in this position and we just go down and up. That's a lot more challenging. You'll find that a lot more challenging than just doing this. And then this becomes a lot more challenging than just doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And then doing this becomes a lot more challenging than doing just that, than just doing the reverse lunge. Mm-hmm. And then doing something like this becomes even more challenging, right? So those are all phenomenal exercises that I'll use with clients and golfers. Those are all variations. Those are all build-ups, progressions. But again, it's tough to say to an entire group tonight, do that, because I don't know where your physical, body, I haven't done an assessment on you. But single, I could say this confidently, and this works for the group tonight, is that single leg strength training is more relevant for sport, for golf, for movement, really, than bilateral strength training, right? So even with my highest level professional athletes I have, they might come in and do a round of a bilateral exercise, but then after that, we're going right to single leg stuff. And we're sticking with single leg stuff the rest of the workout. And that's where they usually start yelling at me and cursing at me and saying, this sucks.
It's
but
hard.
Yeah, that's making you better, right? So because life is one leg after another. Sport is one leg after another. So that's what we have to kind of look at. But again, I don't want to go so deep into that because I don't know where you are. I mean, we could talk about doing a single leg deadlift immediately into like a pull, into a stabilization exercise. That's way more difficult than just trying to conceptualize this, right? So there's other ways we can kind of do it. I wish I had the piece of equipment with me on hand, but I don't right now. I do. You can get something like a basic floor slider and kind of use that to kind of understand the hinge.
Oh, okay.
Which is a little bit more manageable than having to lift your foot off the ground.
Okay.
So there are, I guess the point of that, bring us full circle, is there is plenty of single leg exercises and variations and progressions to be done. A, I don't know everyone's assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And B, you want to make sure I give out good advice so you know how you execute it properly. Because you don't want to say, okay, go do like 3 different variations of a lunge, and it's totally not executing well, and I'm just hurting you more than helping.
Right, right. Mm-hmm. How long, so I don't have any questions yet, and I know we're coming to about 35 minutes. How long does a typical, I know you have there's a TPI assessment as well as you do your consultation, but how long does that take someone like yourself to do, and if you meet with somebody? Is that a 2-hour thing, a 1-hour thing? What's the assessment?
Probably about between an hour and 15 minutes.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it will move pretty quick, especially because I'm pretty routined in it. And, you know, over the time, we've seen a lot of the same issues. So you kind of know what to look for,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But I think generally speaking, people have issues with hip hinging itself, learning how to hip hinge, learning how to not have a C-spine because maybe we're a lot of computerized desk work kind of people. And then the mobility test, like do you have that mobility in your hips? Do you have that mobility in your thoracic spine?
Right.
And you're able to understand the difference. So, you know, those are the big ones. And then our shoulder work. So our shoulder work, what I was going to get into with that is a safe way to do shoulder work. And the only way I'm going to speak about tonight, because I don't want to, this is a dangerous one when it comes to the shoulder. I don't want to give bad advice here. And I'm going to turn our camera this way a little bit, because a lot can go wrong with the shoulder complex, and then, you know, you're kind of driving into the ground and chopping, and sometimes people feel like they have hurt shoulders, is something what we call a landmine. So what do I mean by that? And you may not have access to this, and that's why I don't want to go too much into it. But if you have a some sort of barbell, or honestly, sounds funny, but right now maybe you only have like a broomstick, and at the end of the broomstick, you can kind of attach like a bag or something. Mm-hmm. And you kind of, and I'm sorry for moving my camera around a little bit, but I want you to see this. You kind of put it on an edge, and then you kind of kneel down. So I'm going to be on one knee. Mm-hmm. And I just hold the barbell here, or the broomstick, and I push forward this way. And I kind of lean, it helps me lean forward and get the mobility I need. So if we did a dumbbell, sometimes we'd be like out in here. This allows my hips to kind of help me lean forward and get a mobility of overhead, right? That I might not be able to get if I just went like this with a dumbbell. I might be struggling and doing this, or curving my spine, or hiking my spine. Mm-hmm. So, you know, those are the things that, again, I don't want to get too much in depth with that, because I don't want, that could be something that goes wrong fast without, you know, somebody watching you. But so those are like, that's a shoulder exercise I would suggest.
Could you do the one where, and I know we've done it on that, but I've done it on the countertop, where you kind of do a push-up on the countertop?
Yeah, a little bit more for like an upper body.
That's more chest? Okay, okay.
Because based on everyone's like maybe possible pronation, I don't want to like a chest press is going to kind of over pronate you. Right? So if you're not doing more pulls than you are, and actually, Lorianne, you're a good example of this. When we work together, you could probably contest this. We do way more pulling than actually do pushing. Yeah. You know, as golfers, we want to make sure we just constantly are back more than forward.
Yeah.
Forward. So,
well, I'm really good at hunching, so I got to get out of that.
So let me just break off one more thing, and then we can open the door. So when it comes to our rotational exercises, okay, If you have a band, again, it's great. If you don't, maybe you can have a towel or something like that. That might work, or a long kind of rope or belt or something. But you hook it up to something, maybe a wall or a post or something. So now it's kind of straight out in front of you. And what I'll always start with, or I mentioned last time, is stability in your core. So not rotating, right? So I'll take this band and I'll try to have somebody press it straight out. Now the band wants me to obviously rotate and laterally flex, but I don't want to do that. So I'm making myself not do that and keeping myself stable. Okay, so that's going to help for stabilizing. Okay, now if we have really good hip mobility, now we could start working on our rotations. Okay, but notice when I rotate, my hip rotates and my lower back isn't rotating. It's really my hip complex that's just turning and rotating. It's actually, my lumbar spine is actually being I'm teaching it to be stable through rotation of my hips. So I'm teaching my back to be stable through my hips. Now, an easy way to do this, maybe if you don't have access to something like that, is you take a ball. If you find a wall you don't want, you can use, you don't really care too much about, right? And you kind of just throw it from your hip, and then you lightly just throw it against the wall in a horizontal way. And again, if you notice, it's kind of like your golf swing. I'm kind of throwing my hips toward that wall. That's going to also help us with a little bit of power in our swing. But just to regress, if you don't have good mobility there and you're just evening it, then I'm really teaching you the wrong thing to do, and I don't want you to do that. But if you don't have the mobility, then we got to break it back down to some mobility drills and activation drills, like the mini band I talked about and things like that. So it's all layers. So it's tough for me to say, like, do this, do that, do this, because I do not know each individual assessment. So it always starts with mobility. It starts with it layers on activation. Are those hips like moving? Are they capable of being turned on? Maybe we just need to turn them on, and now they have more movement. So that's what the mini bands will do for you. And then we could start working on our posterior strength, working on our hips, working on our glutes, working on our back muscles to pull, to keep our posture in line. And then we could start working on some anti-rotational drills. And then finally our rotational drills when everything's kind of layered properly.
Okay. So, great. Well, I have a question here, and I'll see if anybody has any questions. But given that we're still in this semi-reopening phase, and you have been gracious enough to offer to the WMGA members, so I'm going to have to push it extend it from the end of June, maybe to the end of July for us,
sure,
to do a free assessment for them, whether it's just fitness or whether it's a TPI component of it. From that perspective, given that not all the gyms have opened, can people do it with you on Zoom? Is it possible to do that? Or does it, I know obviously physically being there and you could do one-on-ones with all the COVID procedures, but could you do assessments or a decent assessment given the video capabilities?
Yes, so good question. Absolutely, I do a lot of Zoom. And Zoom is effective. I mean, Zoom is better than nothing, right? And Zoom is better than writing on a piece of paper. So, and sending it to somebody. So Zoom is definitely an effective tool that we've discovered through this time that has been helpful. I have a fully equipped gym in my garage. On one-on-one sessions out of that I've been doing quite frequently and hour to hour. I'm pretty busy. But I have that capability. I have every type of tool possible that we need in here. And then I also will travel to somebody if they have, they would desire something like that as well to come to their home or whatever it may be for a one-on-one session. So there is three options, there's those three options, the Zoom, my home, your home type of situation. And, to your point, Lorianne, is that we don't know. Unfortunately, I'm a facility owner and this has kind of struck us hard and we have no idea when facilities are going to be open. So I try to create an environment that will work, until that time.
No, and I could attest you follow all the COVID procedures on a one-on-one basis, and you have more toys than I have at home in regards to bands and weights and all that. So it is beneficial. And what I will do, Brian, is I'll reiterate when we do send out the video for other folks that you're available to doing these and that you've offered to the WMGA members this free assessment that they should probably take advantage of, whether it's via Zoom or not, because it really has helped my game. I still have a ways to go, but from that. So I appreciate that. So I'm just looking and seeing if there's any questions, Sarah. I don't see any. Do you? Am I missing
The
anything?
latest one about recapping some of the exercises by name.
Okay.
They could
Brian,
look-
could you recap the exercises that you had by name that you did today?
So, I mean, we started with our activation exercises. Those the glute bridges were when you're laying on your back. I'll move this thing out a little bit again. Our glute bridges, our mini band glute bridges, and it's most effective with the mini band. So you put your mini band here, your glute bridges. So literally meaning like you're squeezing your glutes to make a bridge, right? So you're down in here, you're squeezing up, and it's just here. So you're not throwing your hips up with loose glutes. You're really trying to squeeze your glutes. The mini band will create tension, which you'll have to fight, which will get more of your hip complex, and that's what we're trying to activate more of. The more we activate that, the more we can see your true mobility, your hip, okay? We have our clamshells, which is your fetal position, down in here, opening up again. With the minivan, you're putting more resistance. If you maybe don't have that, you can maybe push on your hip, on your knee to create resistance. Maybe put like something on there, hold it to add some resistance. Okay, so you have those. And then you have your bird dogs, which are here, out to your side.
That's not the bird dog. That's the fire hydrant.
Oh, your hydrants. I'm sorry, bird dog is what we went over in the assessment.
Yeah, I know the bird dogs.
Thanks for the help. And then, so those are all our lower body activation exercises. Our strength ones that we went over today were our deadlift, which is that reiterating that hip hinge for us. Okay, and then we had our single leg deadlift. We did speak about, I'm sorry, I keep adjusting the screen. We did speak about, the squat, which everyone should know, right? You're squatting down and up. Or the variation of different split squats, or reverse lunging, or lateral lunging, and all the complex stuff that we did. Again, that's a little bit advanced. I don't want to get too in depth about that. Then we worked on our pulls. So our rows, horizontally rowing, whether it be with a band or with a weight, bent over row, or something like along that line, keeping our back flat, our hips behind us. So it's kind of coincides with the whole hip hinging movement, okay? As well as our vertical pulls, which is our pulling downward. Yep. I mean, pull up is like the number one universal thing, end of time type of vertical pull. But of course, those are difficult. So we can use a band, or you can get a towel or just hold tension down. Okay, that's a little bit more of an isometric kind of exercise. And then we talked about our anti-rotation drill, so our anti-rotation work, as well as our rotational exercises or ball throws.
Terrific. Great. Well, thank you going through that. I appreciate that.
Sure.
All right. Any other questions? I think we're good there. So Brian, I want to thank you. This was great to really, like you said, it is kind of a layering effect from that perspective, because you do the exercise to strength, and then you kind of, I'm seeing the exercise as it pertains particular to the golf swing. So that was a great dovetail in regards to what you did first. And I just want to remind the folks that A, this will be recorded, B, when we send out just a wrap up to this as well as a survey, we will graciously accept Brian's offer to give us some free assessments. And then also we will be doing, just as a heads up, ladies, we are going to be continuing the swing series. We're doing it not as frequent as we did when we were all in self-quarantine, because we've got a lot of other things going on and everybody's working on the reopening phases. But we will be doing something in July with Wendy Dominic on rules. And then probably towards the end of July, we'll be doing working with Sarah Cohen, who has done some yoga with golf. So kind of like the stretching part, Brian, that you were talking about. And she does exercises that you could do on the course. So while you're waiting for someone to hit a ball, or you're feeling something like a little tight, what are some of the things you can do with what's there on the golf course to help strengthen that? So she does a very good job of merging those two, which I think will dovetail to what you're doing from a strength perspective. All right. With that, Brian, I think we're good. Okay. Yep. Patricia says thank you for going over the exercises. She was trying to do them while you were speaking. So hopefully she got them down. If not, Patricia, we'll give you the contact information for Brian, and you can get with him directly on that. So thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. And Brian, we will be sending out the recording, and everybody can repeat this and see access to it. So thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you, everyone.